It is October 11th, 2024, and Biden has apparently canceled his trip to Germany and Angola. Now, you may be wondering, we know that he was going to Germany to meet with Zelensky, to meet with the other NATO members who are cheerleaders for Ukraine, and to talk about some sort of a victory plan. But why is he going to Angola? Well, we got into exactly why with a special guest earlier. We looked at the fact that the US is still very focused on trying to combat China and its influence in Africa. But of course, the US is going about it all of the wrong ways, but that hasn't stopped them from trying. They want access to the minerals and natural resources in Central Africa, and they are continuing to keep a focus on the region, even as the rest of the world is dealing with a variety of US funded and enabled wars. And yet the US still hasn't forgotten about Africa, and also more specifically about the countries in West Africa over in the Sahel region that have said that they want nothing to do with the West. So what does that mean for the continent? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Koffi Kouakou, an Africa analyst and senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that we were going to talk about Biden's upcoming visit to Angola on his international trip next week. That has since been canceled, or I guess maybe postponed. But when it came to his plans to go to Angola in the first place, I know I heard about this trip and I was kind of going, okay, why this country in particular? If you ask the White House, they claim that it was for plans for Biden to meet with the country's president to talk about shared priorities and partnerships, including climate security, transitioning to clean energy, and strengthening democracy and civil engagement. So what do they really mean by that? And what was the significance of this planned trip?
Look, this is thankful reminding people, this is what I call the goulash soup, when everything is mixed into it. They're going to talk about democracy, they'll talk about, strengthening partnerships. All these are true in large part. But we've seen this for so many times, especially with the United States and Africa, and nothing has come about. Even during the time of President Obama, we're all sort of looking to see something different, but nothing came about. And so this is the first visit of a president, US president in Africa, in about a decade and more. And that is really something very concerning, because it shows that the US is not quite interested in Africa per se. Sorry for this. So that they're not interested at all. And it shows from, President Obama to, well, President Obama came in, but was not quite a great reception per se. And then, of course, President Trump came in. He didn't, when he became president, but he never visited Africa. He only sent his wife and a couple of people to come in, but even Biden as well. Now that he's a lame duck, he's got a couple of months to go until January. So it's sort of, it's not even a showstopper. It's coming to one country, Angola. And I've told many of my friends and commentators that he's not coming to Africa. He's coming to a very small part of Africa, which is Angola. And it's sort of central western part of Africa by the Gulf of Guinea. And it's very clear what he's coming for. It was coming for. It's mainly Angola, the DRC, all that Central African slot, band is very rich in minerals, and minerals that are very important for American companies. And I think you got to give it to him. At least is coming. Just a little show. He's promised the president of Angola, João Lourenço, who attended last year the December Africa Summit in Washington, D.C. There were also others who attended, the president of DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, and then, of course, the president of Zambia, Ichilema. And all of these are based on very simple transactional relationship, nothing else. And most of these countries love to be, obviously, with the United States, but many of them are now rethinking their relationship. So at the heart of this visit was to cement what is called the Lobito Corridor, which is an old railroad corridor that was built mainly by the British and the Europeans to really extract a great deal of minerals from Central Africa to the western coast on the Gulf of Guinea. But also what they're doing now this time is to try to make the link between the coastal side of the Gulf of Guinea to the ocean, the Atlantic, not the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean on the other side of the east coast of Africa. And this is going to be a big deal because it is basically to extract those minerals. So this transactional relationship is interesting, but usually Africans have become very skeptical about it. And it's a bit sad that I think nature stopped him from coming. He's now have to deal with the floods in the United States. And so we don't know when he's going to be back. But frankly, when you listen to people and Africans, they don't expect anything big out of it.
Okay, that's good to know. And you highlighted some really important stuff there. I thought it was interesting when it comes to, because of course I'm looking into this, I'm going, okay, why Angola? Looking into it a little bit further, as you were noting there, the minerals and other natural resources that are in the region. And it's interesting because when you look at who else is interested in those natural resources, you also have China and you have the US, and these reports noting that, look, they're trying to counter China's influence in the region. That's not exactly some big secret. But when it comes to where a country like Angola stands, and especially other countries in the region, kind of as you were noting, hey, they're open for business to a certain extent, right? The US is interested, China is interested. They're kind of going, okay, and hopping on board. But how far do you see that interest going? Because they have to know that with interest from the West and the US especially comes the demand for control, comes threats, comes increased involvement and increased demands on their end. So how do you think that Angola and especially the region sees the US right now?
Well, at this stage, I think, in fact, Angola's history with the United States is a very important one. Remember, one of the key things that happened during the Reagan, can you hear me? Okay, sorry for that. During the Reagan days, fighting communism and so forth, Angola was a really principal place where the Cuban troops were fighting against the South African troops. That really changed the nature of the environment in Southern Africa that led to the end of apartheid. And of course, the South Africans were supported by the United States because they're also fighting communism and so forth. But after that, Angola, with the old president who now is not there, moved nicely with the China. And the Chinese have huge investment in Angola. So Angola is now in between two powers, the United States and then Angola, and of course, Europeans for sure. And so João Lourenço, the president, is trying his best to appease both sides. And I think he's trying to play a very sensitive card. He doesn't want to be seen as against the US nor against China. But very soon he's going to have to make a decision, like most African countries. With the BRICS situation, the world is changing very fast. A lot of African countries are now caught in between, seeing, are you with me or against me? They're going to have to decide one way or another. But most of them will tell you that they are not aligned to anybody else. But it's not quite true because there's a great deal of leaning towards China. I'm sure you've heard last month the BRICS, a forum on China-Africa cooperation, big one in Beijing, where the Chinese were very successful in bringing all these African countries. So this balance is very, very carefully done by João Lourenço and many African countries. However, as I said again, they're going to have to choose going forward as things are changing very fast. But right now, I must tell you, the pulse in Africa is very suspicious about the United States. and careful about how to build a relationship with China, Russia, and other countries that are emerging.
Yeah, and I don't blame them. I mean, I know that they're kind of watching everything that other countries within West Africa and the Sahel region have been through in recent years, and they've got to be very aware, right, of the way that the West does things. But going back to what you were mentioning about the libido corridor, that was really interesting to me. I know that, okay, so you have the G7, the US wants to boost infrastructure investments in Africa through programs like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which officially unveiled its first economic project in Africa, which is known as the Libido Corridor earlier this year. So I'm curious, how does that compare to China's Belt and Road Initiative and kind of the Chinese involvement that is already there? Does it seem like the US is trying to push out China, trying to present a legitimate alternative? Or is this just kind of about saying, hey, we want to make sure that we have our involvement in the region too?
Yeah, I mean, the competition is already too late for the United States. I mean, this infrastructure projects, in fact, the person is leading it at the White House is an acting person. So it tells you already. I forget her name, but she's the acting person on this project. And Africans have been waiting for long to hear the details of put it into action. Let's see it. And the Chinese are way ahead in terms of Belt and Road initiatives and activities. They've invested more than 282 billion in Africa already. The US is not even close to that. And so that's the only flagship project that the US and the US, of course, pushing the Europeans to make sure that this project attempts to compete against China. But there is no competition whatsoever. China is really building the continent. Basic plumbing, that's around infrastructure to build roads, not just roads, but ports, hospitals. I mean, you name it. In the US, I mean, I ask anybody, what has the US done for Africa lately? People can't even remember anything that the US is building. And the idea, we only hear much more about wars, economic sanctions, distractions. So the US's image is not of a builder anymore. It's not of a sort of a convening power that uses its strength to really make things better for Africans by and large. And Africans are now sort of very closely, not distancing themselves. They can't do it quickly, but there are more and more looking at show me the money. And as they say in Latin, show me the money, monstra mi pecunia. That's what they're saying in Latin. Show me the money. And the US is not showing the money, not only showing the money, but the US is not also showing the project on the ground. We can't see anything. I mean, if you ask me, I keep my eyes on many things. I don't see much building or constructions to build Africa and in help. They have some things on HIV/AIDS, vaccines, but these are really sort of, I would say, side talks that Africans want to see. They're benefiting from it. They can't chase them away, but they're saying, show us the money.
And I don't blame them on that, right? Especially when you've got other countries like China and Russia showing their interest, getting actively involved, saying, hey, let's have a mutually beneficial partnership. Then all of a sudden that gives countries in Africa a chance to kind of look around and go, oh, hey, we actually have value that is just beyond the US coming in, claiming that they're going to combat terrorism and set up all of these fancy military bases and then threatening us into oblivion if we don't do what they want. And speaking of the West and what they're up to, I know that we also saw that nearly 50 heads of government from different countries, including Canada, Cambodia, and Georgia, joined French President Emmanuel Macron at the Francophonie Summit, a 2-day event celebrating French-speaking cultures. Now, I know that there was a big focus on Lebanon here, a call for a ceasefire, as you obviously have Israel continuing with its deadly bombardment of the country. But how do you view this conference in relation to Africa? I mean, surely they have not forgotten about Africa, even as much as countries within West Africa have really worked to sever ties with France.
Indeed, Rachel, the timing was so bad because you have the Israel invading Lebanon. So that got a lot more mileage than some kind of francophonie where, France is trying to use its soft power to still maintain its sort of empire around the world. It's a large empire, close to about a quarter of a billion people involved in this Commonwealth, the French, using French as a sort of binding language to keep them all together. And so they do that every 3 years or so. The last one was the one before this one was in Cameroon, I think in 2023 or so. And they usually do it at the end of the year, somewhere in November, October. This one now in Paris was just happened last week, but it didn't have enough mileage at all because it's just soft. But the reason why it's a very important flag to talk about it is that the French are still trying hard to bring about, the old empire, if you want, or the colonial countries they used to rule under a much softer approach, using language as the channel to make that happen. And it seems to be working because culturally, most people speak French, still have a great reverence for France. However, there's a change that's taking place with a lot of people, especially in Africa. Francophones in Africa are now saying, we need more freedom. We just want to have our own sovereignty. We know we've been speaking French for many, many, many years, but we're going to speak it, but we need to be a little bit more free in our sovereignty around military issues, economic issues, and then also some cultural issues, their own languages. And I think one of the key thing about this kind of conference is that the French uses also to solve problems in Africa. And one of the key problems in Africa now, which is not getting enough coverage, is a conflict in the Eastern Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been going on for three decades now, and is pitting two countries together, mainly the Democratic Republic of Congo and then Rwanda. And at this at this summit on the side, President Macron trying to bring both President Felix Tshisekedi, and Paul Kagame together to talk. But of course, it didn't work because he had to meet with them separately to say, sort yourself out. We don't want any more wars. France is now tired, but it's not quite the right way to do it because Macron seems to be a good buddy of President Paul Kagame. And evidence enough, Paul Kagame's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mishikwabu, I think, is heading the Francophonie, which means she's the Secretary General of it. And then the French are also using Rwandan troops to really help Total Energies in Mozambique to help them to secure their bases, although Total has sort of stopped what's happening now. But the French are really closely in contact with Paul Kagame. And so President Felix Tshisekedi of the Congo sees that, he's really in the bad space because he feels like President Macron is siding already with Paul Kagame. And that's very interesting to see. But also, there were talks about West Africa. Remember the three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and then Niger, still into that sort of target, the French target, but also American targets, because they're very worried that if these three countries really free themselves from French yoke and American yoke, it will have some kind of snowball effect around West Africa and Central Africa, which will make the French lose their power, and then the Americans also lose their power in that region of Africa.
Okay, that's so interesting, especially when you look at the fact that we talk about how the West comes in with all of these threats. So it's fascinating that France is now trying to be like, hey, it's fine, we're friends, we speak the same language. Don't ask any questions about how you came to speak the French language, right? Or how that got involved, but just don't worry about it. We're all friends here. And you've got the US with maybe a version of that, right? Saying, hey, we want to work with you. We want to help out with your economy and democracy. That's the most important point here. But as you were noting, when it comes to the violence that we've seen in the Sahel region, I mean, that is continuing on. You continue to see these attacks from groups that are linked to Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. And I thought it was interesting because this week there was a warning that came specifically from the UK, the head of the country's domestic security service, that warned about a resurgence of ISIS and Al Qaeda. Now, he was specifically warning for the UK, but it's always interesting to me. I kind of have to take a step back anytime the West is warning about a resurgence of ISIS and ask, okay, why would that be useful to the West in any way? Because we all weren't born yesterday. We know how the West likes to work with their various extremist groups to carry out certain political aims. So, what are the concerns right now for West Africa? I know we've talked about everything that countries like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are truly up against when it comes to saying, you know what, we're going to pull out of ECOWAS, we're going to set up our own alliance. They know the pushback that they could face, not from their own people necessarily, but from violence in the region, these extremist groups, and of course the West. So where do those concerns stand right now?
I think this is one big concern, Rachel, and it's manufactured terrorism. And I say manufactured terrorism with two heads. The first head is really from outside those countries, those regions, which mean foreign, coming from outside and then attacking them. I'm going to give you a little bit more details later. But the second one is internal, which means the foreign groups that are funding those terrorists are finding people within those countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, to be able to create some kind of instability and then sort of unseat the military powers. And as you see, there have been many coup attempts that are, especially in Burkina Faso. Last month, there was another attempt to kill President Ibrahim Traore. He managed to fend them off, and he managed to capture many of them. In fact, some coming from the north, but the major group is sitting, as he said himself. I'm not just coming out with, I'm not saying it myself, but he himself was on TV saying that the sources of this terrorism is coming from Côte d'Ivoire, which means down south. And Côte d'Ivoire, of course, is a country down south. And there they have bases of these terrorists that are funded, and it's pushing it to say that the funds are coming from outside, and we can see that he wants to point to France and perhaps the United States. Because as you know, the United States is already building, very soon, it's going to be building a couple of bases in the northwestern part of Côte d'Ivoire. And that's going to be very close to Mali and Burkina Faso. So the tensions are very, very high. And people are so concerned that, the rumors going on around is that the United States and G7 countries, and especially NATO, have now put together SWAT teams to go and then kill the leaders of those three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. So they are also preparing. They're also gearing up to wait for these groups. And it's very, very concerning. And there's also worried in Côte d'Ivoire that the president of Côte d'Ivoire is using the country as a basis to destabilize the region. And there's great concern. But going back to the first element I mentioned, about the fact that most of these manufactured terrorism are coming from outside, it is clear that these terrorists that we didn't see before are now showing up. They're well armed. They have groups that are roaming around but they're roaming around and killing people with the help of foreigners, which means with the help of foreign help. And those foreign helps are very clear. We know the evidence is there that France has been supporting some of them. And then, of course, the United States is also supporting some of these. This is very concerning for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's concerning to me, especially thinking about the fact that the US it's not that they don't know when to back off, but they are willing to incite terror, right? They're willing to incite violence and killing in other regions in order to, I guess, try to carry out political aims, or in this case, to try to show countries in the region that you do not want to fight back against the Western backed government that we have given you, right? They're trying to make them pay a price for it. And then walking around and insisting that they care about democracy, right? That this is all democracy related at the end of the day. The hypocrisy truly never ends, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Koffi Kouakou, an Africa analyst and senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
You're welcome, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's also where you can check out my new series that's exclusive for paid subscribers called Sanction. I have new episodes available every week. You can also check out Sanction over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can join the community and continue support for my work. And as always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.